organization. Sorry. Algeria today, as of 16 June, counts at least 255 prisoners of opinion, which is quite a heavy escalation compared to a couple of weeks ago. According to local activists, between 16 May and 14th of June, at least 138 peaceful protesters and activists were sentenced to prison terms. So this shows a bit this escalation. In addition, 2 presidential ordinances were adopted last week, which have the potential to further criminalize peaceful activism, human rights work, and journalism, including by expanding the definition of terrorism in the penal code. In that regard, yesterday, a joint letter was published, signed by 82 Algerian and international organizations. Some of them are sponsoring this event today, to urge state to take action at the Human Rights Council next week under item 2 or item 3, and to address Algeria in order to protect Algerians' public freedoms and to prevent a further potentially irreversible escalation. So very briefly, I will introduce our speakers before I leave the floor to them. We have with us today Clément Voule, the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Peaceful Assembly and Association, also a longtime activist and jurist who kindly accepted to join us, and who will speak about what his office has documented and has observed in the past couple of months in Algeria with regards to freedom of assembly and association. We have also with us today Amna Guellali, Deputy Regional Director for MENA for Amnesty International, who is also sponsoring this event. Amnesty will share with us, Amna will share with us what Amnesty has documented also these past few months with regards to human rights violations. We have also with us today Mouloud Boumghar, Algerian civil society activist, but also public law professor, specialist in international human rights law, who will share his perspective, mostly as an Algerian activist, on these recent developments and perhaps why we should be alarmed. And last but not least, Dalia Ghanem, a special scholar resident scholar at the Carnegie Middle East Center. Her intervention will help us kind of zoom out a little bit of the human rights context to understand, as a researcher, what are, can we speak of a political and economic impasse today in Algeria? So she will help us kind of give a bit of context to this situation. I will give the floor back to you, Mr. Voule, and I remind you again, all our speakers to speak slowly and to be mindful of the time. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Adesh, for giving me the floor. And let me first thank Kerr Institute, but also the AIDS organization that co-sponsored this event, and Algerian civil society for inviting me to attend this panel and speak about my concern and my work in relation to the ongoing situation in Algeria. Before, let me make it clear that peaceful assembly is a fundamental human rights guaranteed by International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights in its Article 21 and other relevant international covenants, regional and international. Its exercise is a sign of a democratic and healthy society where individuals can shape their own futures, take part in the conduct of public affairs, and decide for themselves. The negative image that stigmatize, protest, dissents, and those who organize assembly to express grievance and demand good governance has to change. Therefore, peaceful assembly should not be subject to the use of force by law enforcement officials. Where it's unavoidable, it must comply with the strict principle of necessity and proportionality as per international law and standard to which Algeria is bound. In addition, states have a responsibility to protect peaceful protests and ensure that there is an enabling environment for protesters to assemble safely and to take action against those who instigate violence. Since the beginning of this year, I'm very concerned about the human rights situation in Algeria in general, and in particular, the exercise of the right to freedom of peaceful assembly, freedom of expression, the situation of human rights defenders, and the civic space. As you all know, the Iraq movement has been revised since February 2021 and has gained momentum and massive support over the last month. The protesters who often gather in cities and wilayas all across the country on Friday have been largely peaceful according to information we received. Nonetheless, the government response has been on multiple occasions one of the disproportionate force, including the use of tear gas and baton against unarmed and peaceful protesters. Furthermore, the government has tried to keep demonstrations from happening in the first place. I express my concern to the Algerian authority at the arrest and detention of many protesters connected to Iraq movement for exercising their fundamental right to protest. While most protesters have been released on the same day that they have been arrested, some have been charged with vague charges such as attack on the national unity, dissemination of wrongful information, demoralizing the army, or endangering Islam. I would like to stress that protesters should never be criminalized or arrested for their peaceful participation in protest. The criminalization and repression of peaceful protests are in contradiction with the state's obligation laid out in the ICCPR. This is why I'm concerned about the communique of the Minister of Interior of Algeria on 9 May, which said that they will consider all demonstrations to be illegal and violating the Constitution and laws of Algeria that didn't clearly indicate the organizer, time, and places that the protest will take place. My mandate has constantly emphasized that a notification regime which allows organizations to notify the authority about the intention to protest and where they will protest should be the rule. If we look at the Iraq movement from the information we received, this is a social movement that is decentralized without a clear hierarchy or structure. As a consequence, a lot of protests are spontaneous or quasi-spontaneous and don't have a clear organizer. The government should therefore refrain from criminalizing the participants of such spontaneous or quasi-spontaneous protests. I'm calling the Algerian government to put an end to the disproportionate use of force against protesters and to halt the persecution and targeting of human rights defenders, journalists, and people involved in the Iraq movement. I further call on the government to seek a meaningful and constructive dialogue with the Iraq movements and to the greater Algerian public in general. I also call on the international community, especially UN member states, to use all the pressure available to convince the Algerian government from using force against protesters and to facilitate a dialogue between the government and the Iraq movement that can lead to real change. It is important because I think Algerian and Algerian people need a real transition to democracy and a peaceful society. My mandate and other special procedure mandates holder have sent multiple letters to the Algerian government in which we have expressed our concern regarding these issues. Unfortunately, some of these letters, which are available on the website of OHCHR, do not receive substantive answer that we are expecting from the governments. I'm also using this opportunity to also encourage Algerian governments to reply to those communications, as this will help us as a mandate holder to understand clearly the situation and to also know exactly what to advise states on the measure to take in order to enforce the enjoyment of this fundamental freedom, the right to peaceful assembly. Let me also say that I have requested from the Algerian government to allow me to visit the country. I send multiple reminders because I think that in this current situation, my visit is important to assess the situation on the ground, to see the measure that the government is taking to ensure the enjoyment of these rights. And my visit will allow me also to advise government through reports and the recommendation on what steps to take to ensure that the country return to the peaceful situation where those fundamental freedoms will be enjoyed. I also call on Algerian governments to release those protesters that are arrested and which I send multiple communication. It's important that the government protect the rights of journalists to inform the public and to also monitor the behavior of law enforcement. No one should be criminalized or should be condemned for exercising his fundamental freedom protected by the international covenant on civil and political rights. It is a duty of the states to ensure that these rights are enforced and to take all necessary measures to protect those who are exercising this fundamental freedom. Thank you for listening to me, and I hope through this panel to be able also to understand more the ongoing contest in the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Voule. That was a very comprehensive intervention. I turn to you now. Amna, to give us an idea perhaps on what Amnesty has documented from your side in the past few months, or perhaps more, in terms of violations of public freedoms in Algeria. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nadej, and thanks to the Cairo Institute for organizing this important event. I was really pleased to listen to the recommendations of Mr. Voule, the Special Rapporteur, which contained really very important elements that we would like to also support and reiterate in terms of the visit of special rapporteurs to Algeria. But just to go to some of the elements that we have observed recently, as Amnesty International, we believe that the scale of repression in Algeria right now is really unprecedented, and that there is a descent into a full-blown repression of a scale that we haven't seen before. I mean, obviously, the Hirak movement, which was successful in a way in regaining access to the public spaces and opening up the possibility of dissent in Algeria, which was completely off impossible at some point. Nowadays is facing really a repression that we haven't seen before. And this is due to the fact that after some lull during which the protesters were able to take to the streets in millions and to reclaim the public space and to call for reforms, there was a suspension of the Hirak movement, as we all know, between February 2020 and February 2021. So during this year of suspension of the Hirak, which was due to the COVID crisis and to the halting of the movement, both spontaneously and under the recommendation of the government. There was a suspension of the Hirak, but the government did not suspend its repressive tactics against the movement, and there was an acceleration during this period between February 2020 and 2021 of the repression through the criminalization of online dissent, through the prosecution of hundreds of activists who have expressed themselves online. But since the Hirak has resumed in February 2021, we have seen new tactics, new means that the government has been using in order to suppress and quell the protest movement entirely. And this is these kind of techniques and tactics that we have observed are new because, for example, the government obviously has criminalized the protesters, the protest movement since the beginning through the recourse to penal code articles. We counted more than 20 penal code articles that the government has used during the 2 years of the Hirak movement, but they have added new layers of repression recently, and they have added a new way to demonize the protest movement by a resort to the terrorism label in order to outlaw some of the components of the Hirak movement and in order to criminalize even further the protesters. And we all know from the textbooks of the repressive regimes that once they start using the terrorism label, it becomes really, really very serious and more serious than before, and it becomes an attempt to quell the entire protest movement. And so this is something that is new in Algeria, that started really in March, April of this year, and we didn't see it before. And it shows also that there is now a new discourse towards the Hirak, something that we also didn't observe before, because, for example, when President Tebboune came to power following contested presidential elections, he praised the Hirak movement. Obviously, on the ground, the repression was there, but the discourse was one of praising the Hirak, of talking about the Hirak as being something positive in the history of Algeria. They included the Hirak in the new constitution as being a movement that has opened, a new space for the Algerians, and so the discourse was one of praise, but the reality on the ground was one of repression. Now the discourse and the reality on the ground are both going in the same direction, which is one of a repressive discourse and a repression on the ground. And so we see that through the obviously adoption of, first of all, a new discourse, demonization of the Hirak movement, and also through the adoption of new articles in the penal code, which were rushed through by the president through ordonnance. So while the parliament was suspended and the parliament, so the legislative assembly was not anymore functional, the president took this approach of creating new laws through ordonnance and adding a new layer of the in the repressive arsenal of the authorities by defining, adding a new definition to terrorism and including as terrorism the attempt to change the nature of the regime, even if it's through peaceful means, which is obviously something that will lead to the criminalization of the Hirak movement through the terrorism, charges. And they have also adopted a new pace in terms of repression by, for example, labeling some of the components of the Hirak or movements that were active in the Hirak, like MAC, as terrorist organizations, and prosecuting at least 17 or 18, I don't remember exactly the number of people who are being prosecuted nowadays in Algeria for terrorism offenses. So we have the 15 activists that were prosecuted in Oran, including human rights defenders, which are prominent, like Qadour Chouisha, Jamila Loukil, and the journalist Saïd Boudour, and 12 others who were prosecuted recently under terrorism charges and conspiracy charges. But we have also another prominent lawyer like Abderraouf Arslan, who was prosecuted under those same charges of terrorism, and other activists as well. So this is really something that is of utmost concern to us as Amnesty, and we believe that this is a new turn of events in Algeria. What is also striking in terms of the new tactics that are used by the authorities is the fact that the authorities are now threatening civil society organizations and political parties of dissolution, something also that is new, because, for example, before, obviously, the civil society space was under threat, and many human rights organizations and associations in Algeria were facing a difficult situation because they are in a kind of a legal limbo after the authorities adopted a new law in 2012 calling on all organizations to re-register before the authorities, and they were never able to re-register because of the legal hurdles and administrative labyrinth in which the authorities have put them. But now we are in a new, different scale of threats against civil society, because they are now threatening to suspend or dissolve even civil society organizations that are prominent, like I'm sure everybody knew or heard about what happened with Raj, the Youth Action Rally, Rassemblement Action Jeunesse, which received a notification from the Ministry of Interior that the authorities have filed an urgent action before the administrative court to dissolve it, citing the lack of consistency with its bylaws, which is obviously a spurious, excuse for dissolving the organization or association. And they have also attempted to suspend two other parties, PST and UCP, which is also something that is quite worrying. The special rapporteur already touched upon the attempt to suppress the protest movement also through this new notice that the authorities have released, which calls on the organizers of protests to file a request before the authorities and before the event, with a clear indication of who are the organizers, their names, the path that they will be taking, which are all forms of restrictions against the protest movement, obviously. Another illustration of this new scale of attack is the attempt to undermine the independence of the judiciary, and the fact that judges, courageous judges who have taken quite a critical stance towards the authorities and have denounced the onslaught against judicial independence and the stranglehold that the executive branch is putting on the judiciary. After denouncing that, they have been threatened and also suspended and revoked. And this is what happened to, for example, Judge Merzouk, who was revoked from his position as a judge in a summary way and without any recourse to an independent review of the decision. We have also noticed, as sure as everybody else, the renewed assault against the freedom of the press, with the fact that journalists are being harassed, are being threatened with prosecution or prosecuted just because they did their jobs of covering the protest movement and of going on the streets with their cameras or with their just, like their eyes to observe what was happening on the ground. And they have been targeted in a way that is also quite clear, clearly aimed at suppressing, reporting on the Hirak. This has happened to several journalists who were arrested during the latest protest movements or latest protests that took place in both Algiers or Oran or other places. We have Kenza Khatou, who was arrested and prosecuted and sentenced to 3 months in jail. Khaled Drarni also repeatedly questioned, and now recently also questioned in the Antar military security barracks about his publications. And we have one journalist who is still in prison since months just because he wrote an article about the tribal tensions in the south, and his name is Rebah Karesh. So I'll stop there. I don't want to take too much of your time, but thanks very much for listening. And we hope that the state parties in the upcoming Human Rights Council will really take an action now and call on the Algerian authorities to stop their repression and release all prisoners of opinion who are languishing in Algerian jails. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Amna, for this very detailed presentation. I move now to Mouloud, who will give us his kind of perspective from as an Algerian civil society activist on why he thinks the situation is alarming and what does it mean for Algeria. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nadej, and thanks to all the team of the Kerr Institute and for the other organizers. Yeah, you will allow me maybe to repeat some points and to give them another perspective, and to add another point. The first point, I think, is that there is a clear will from the authorities to shut down the Hirak. That's the first point. The second point is that we can see that all civic spaces and critical voices are under threat, and the authorities want to strangle them, and now showed how they proceed, how they want to do it. The third point is that the institutional participation, the participation into the institutional life, political institutional life, is a political deadlock as well. So all the doors are closed today, and this shows that there is a huge gap between the reality and the official discourse of the authorities. Since 2019, the authorities pretend that they are protecting the constitutional order and rebuilding the institutions after the 20-year-long Bouteflika's rule. The authorities presented as well the 2020 revision of the constitution as the cornerstone of the new Algeria, which is supposed to be more democratic. Yeah, and you can see that the reality is completely different. Algeria today is a more authoritarian state and a more military state than before 2019. If we look at the freedom of peaceful demonstration that Mr. Voule emphasized on this aspect, we can see that it's supposed to be guaranteed by the constitution on a simple notification regime since 2020. But when we have a closer look to the legislation, we can see that they didn't change the legislation, and it's still based on the authorization regime. And you said, Mr. Voule, that the principle the notification should be the principle. In Algeria, it's not the principle. The principle is nor the notification nor the authorization, it's the prohibition of demonstrations. The authorities are preventing all demonstrations in Algeria, and they want, by preventing all, by prohibiting and forbidding all the demonstrations, they want to shut down the Hirak, because, as you know, the main power visible power of the Hirak. It was this huge peaceful demonstrations in the country, in small towns and in the big cities. The same thing is so the first goal of the Algerian authorities is clearly to shut down the Hirak and to eliminate all this very specific, very peaceful and extremely impressive demonstrations of the beginning and after the resuming. So this is the very first point. If we see, Amna spoke about the freedom of association, and she mentioned what happened to SOS Bablouad and to Rassemblement Action Jeunesse. It's clear that there is a gap between what the Constitution says, which is supposed to encourage now the creation of association on the basis of simple notification, and the reality. The reality is the legislation, the 2012 law on association, which is very, very, very restrictive, is still in force, and the dissolution of OHCHR has been engaged. Engaged on the basis of this law. So we can see that this civic space is being closed, and that they are attacking as well the political parties, critical political parties, which are already banned from the mass media, which cannot organize public activities in public space, for instance, even in their own offices. Sometimes they are under threat, and the two political parties that Amna mentioned today, UCP and PST, are under the threat of dissolutions. And here appears the second goal of the authorities is to eliminate all the civic spaces and that they don't control, and eliminate all the critical voices, including eliminating, not physically of course, including human rights defenders. They want to make them silent. The third point is about the institutional life. According to the official line, the authorities encourage the involvement in the institutional political life, and in the elections they organize and they control. So this way, the participation in the institutions is presented as a democratic way of expression. Whereas according to the official line, the current Hirak deviates from the original Hirak of the beginning, the two first months, and the current Hirak is presented as an anti-democratic movement. It is a corrupted Hirak, inspired according to an official propaganda campaign, which is inspired by the enemies of Algeria, according, of course, to the regime's propaganda. So it's simple. There is a simple picture in the propaganda. There is the Hirak activists who want civilian democratic state. They are traitors and now labeled terrorists, and the regime supporters are patriots, and it's simple. So, but when we look at the involvement in the institutional life, we notice first, we noticed it already. The civic spaces are under a huge pressure. The critical political parties are preventing from having public activities, banned from the mass public media, and the results of the last elections held in a repressive climate, with no independent monitoring, and even with no voters, maybe few voters. The results of the election confirm that the participation-based approach is a political deadlock. So those who left the Hirak and followed the path of the participation in the institution have not been rewarded because they didn't gain anything. That means that there is clearly no will in the regime sphere for making even the smallest change. And Mr. Voule told us that the authorities don't answer his letters, and they don't want to let him go to visit Algeria. So we can see it in the institutional political life, and we can see it in the corruption. There are criminal proceedings against corruption, against some businessmen and politicians, former politicians, some of them resulting in prison sentences. But the network of corruption is still active. these criminal proceedings do not threaten this network, which benefits now to other actors. And so if we have a closer look at the so-called reforms, we can see that they do not answer they did not answer any single demand of the Hirak since the destitution of Bouteflika, President Bouteflika. So from both the institutional aspect and the human rights aspect, the situation is worse than in 2019 at the beginning of the Hirak. So what we can say at the end is that the regime is playing, the authorities are playing a kind of strategy of tension, which is extremely dangerous, especially when they politically instrumentalize the accusation of terrorism. Amna spoke about the revision of the criminal code. Now it's clear when you read this new amendment to the criminal code, which has 10 days, which has been published on the 9th of June, that when you want to change the government, the system of governance, the government system in Algeria by any means, it means even by non-violent means, but with non-constitutional, not contrary to the constitution, but non-constitutional ways, it means that you're a terrorist. It's whether you use violence or you don't use violence. So the question of violence is not important. Which is important is that you want to change the regime. So this is clear. It's a layer, or it's a clear, not criminal. It's more than the criminalization of the Hirak, because what the Hirak wants. The Hirak wants the change of the political system. So the Hirak as a whole is labeled implicitly as terrorist. So this is and this is very alarming, especially when you can understand from that the authorities are in this kind of strategy of tension. They are reactivating the threat of chaos and presenting the peaceful activists as the danger for the country, for the unity of the country. And we saw all the different provisions, the 20 provisions of the penal code that are used against peaceful protesters. So what we need now, when we see that in the last revision of the criminal code, there is a specific provision which provides for up to 15 years of prison for individuals who share information deemed classified, but on ongoing proceedings before the judicial. So it means that the authorities want to have a repression behind closed doors. So it's very important to shed light on this repression, and not to shed it light before, to shed light in bilateral talks behind closed doors, but publicly with strong and clear statements condemning these very negative developments during the Human Rights Council, of course, but beyond. Whether we consider the situation from principle perspective or from real politics perspective, it's very important to give a very strong signal to the authorities before the situation becomes irreversible, and I hope it will not. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mouloud. Thank you. I think we have now kind of a clearer picture of the human rights situation. So before I give the floor to our last speaker to kind of widen a little bit this context, I would like to reiterate that for all those who want to ask a question or intervene, please write down your comments in the Q&A box or the chat section so that I can just read them. It would be quicker for us. Thank you very much. Dalia, I give you the floor.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Nadej. So I guess I'm going to put things into perspective and talk maybe more about the nature of the regime and where do the real source of power and legitimacy stand today in Algeria. So this is a highly complex and opaque system, but it is a system and it is a regime that went through different periods. We went from an outright authoritarian regime under, from the independence of the country under the death of President Boumediene, to a hybrid regime with the opening of the political sphere in 1989. And a hybrid regime, which is also called by many scholars authoritarian, competitive authoritarianism. This is a regime, the Algerian regime is a regime that mixes between elements of democracy and elements of authoritarianism. And where do we stand today? I think we haven't really, moved from this competitive authoritarianism, when in fact the military remain the real locus of power in Algeria. There is no serious or major decision that is taken without them. They've been, the military and the political military establishment, to be more concise and precise, have been piloting the succession since the beginning of the Hirak, that took the entire political military establishment off guard. And by choosing President Boun and putting in place an elected government, the military re-established the usual facade of democracy, with its constitutionalism between quotes and pluralism between quotes, and protected its national reputation and internal cohesion, simply because for the military to remain in the limelight would have been a dangerous game. So it was very important for them to return behind the scene. This is what, we can say that in Algeria, the military are not governing, but they are ruling the country. Second, once the civilian facade have been established, the army rehabilitated the intelligence services. I think we need to understand what has been going on for a year now in Algeria, with all those reshuffling within the military institution, within the gendarmerie, within the security apparatuses in general. I think the army rehabilitated the intelligence services that have been, pushed a bit aside under Bouteflika time, and they reshuffled the security services to maintain their hold on power. The relationship between the presidency that grew stronger under President Bouteflika and the military shifted today for the benefit of the military. And today, unlike Bouteflika, that has, a deep grudge with the military, we have a president that does not cultivate any, grudge for the military and has no scores to settle with the army. Moreover, we have a president that lacks legitimacy in the eyes of a majority of the population, that largely rejected and continue to reject him in a difficult situation in which he needs the support of the military. So I do believe that what they are doing is they are securing Tebboune political survivor, and of course the survivor of their own interests and the system. So the military high command with their intelligence brand and the presidency are removing, and they have been removing for the last year and a half, undesirable individual to prevent internal conflicts and deter domestic unrest. Let us here remember that the military is one of the strongest and the more organized institution within the country. And so it has a very important role in politics. So by ousting these people within, within a former Bouteflika clique, within the military as well, they are trying to put an end and avoid the recurrence of internal conflicts within the institution, and they are trying to pacify the institution. With the Hirak that wants a change of leadership, a deteriorating economic situation as a result of the pandemic, but also of the crash in oil prices that hit in Algeria in the mid of 2014, and with the pandemic that has aggravated the situation that was already very fragile. It is very important for the military and the political establishment to maintain, this facade of homogeneity, even though there is factions and there is internal conflict. But today, when we talk about repression, and one of the speakers said that we are seeing an unprecedented level of repression, I am going to differ a bit, and I'm going to, you know, place things into their place. Today, there is repression, of course, and I am not going to minimize what's going on. This is huge, and this is bad, and this is dangerous, and we should keep an eye on it. However, I don't think it is unprecedented. When the coup happened in 1992, the military went ballistic, literally, on the FIS supporters and on civilians. Their first, let us remember here that one of their first decision of the OHCHR back then was to open 7 camps in the desert, and where they put 40,000 supposedly militants of Le Front Islamique du Salut. And so we are here in a different situation when you can see that the regime has been, you know, in a learning curve. They do know that having the same way in repressing people is going to be counterproductive. And so today they are not using the same tactic. I would say, you know, while in the 90s, the regime used to have recourse immediately to ballistic, heavy-handed violence, today, you know, they are mixing between different modes of repression. We've seen, for instance, entire weeks, I remember I was in Algiers, we've seen entire weeks during the marches of Friday when even the police presence were very minimal. So they are adaptive. They go and they are vacillating between, you know, repression with jails and using the judiciary, but also, you know, they have those plethora of vague and elastic laws to arrest people, to arrest anyone, as a matter of fact. They've been arresting, academics, they've been arresting activists, journalists, and so on and so forth. And we have also adaptive methods. So they go from soft repression to attrition. We've seen attrition in recent weeks, attrition, which means, you know, we've seen weeks and weeks without anything going on. And they are just, sometimes we feel that they are waiting for the Hirak to fade away. One thing that we also notice, and that is very important to keep in mind, today the Algerian regime is marshalling other security forces to do the dirty job, if I may say. Today, for instance, they marshal the police to do it, and the repression is mainly conducted by the police, not by the military. And I think this is, for them, this is a strategic move because they do not want to jeopardize, to put in jeopardy the national reputation of the military and the internal cohesion of the military. Because let us here remember that despite the Hirak calling for a civilian state, not a military state, most of the time within the slogans of the Hirakis, we can feel that the people make a difference between the military institution as a whole and those that they call the generals. So within the institution, it is some personalities, high profile generals that are targeted. So the institution is cognizant of that and doesn't want to jeopardize its national reputation. So depending on the situation, they have mixed mode, you know, they have been using tolerance, concessions, sometimes attrition, and which is basically the ability of opponents to neutralize the tactical innovation through effective tactical counter innovation. They've been also using digital repression. This is very important. You know, there was this very beautiful piece in Foreign Affairs called The Digital Dictators, in which Algeria, I think, is one of these regimes, that they marshaled also electronic flies, and they've been, you know, doing smearing campaign on activists, against activists, and so on and so forth. But not to be long, because I believe we don't have that much time. I would say that there is a substantial risk for the regime to upgrade authoritarianism in Algeria today. We are in an escalation, and my fear is that while we've been, in a hybrid regime mixing between these two elements of authoritarianism and democracy, today we are seeing, an upgrading in authoritarianism. In any case, we are today in a phase where civil-military relationships are in the benefits of the military. And I am scared that because of the economic situation that is worsening by the day, Algerians are already hurting by the difficult financial outlook. We say, usually these kind of regimes, they use the carrot and the stick. Sometimes they use both, depending on the juncture. In 2011, the Algerian regime used both the carrot by handing a very generous handout. L'Ansège was one of them, and buying social peace. But today the carrot is no longer available, and what is remaining there is the stick. And unfortunately, we are in a country where the security apparatuses are pretty strong. They've been upgraded. Let us remember here that Algeria is the first importer of weapons in Africa. This is a military that has been, upgrading its arsenal. The police also during 20 years of Bouteflika have been strengthened. And so the option, I would say, and I would end on that, the option of coercion remains open. And within this difficult economic outlook, I am afraid that, when the current won't be available anymore, with today, we have depleted exchange reserves. In 2013, Algeria has something like $194 billion of exchange reserve. Today, they are standing at 42 billion. They are melting, and they are being used also for the pandemic, but also to buy the new clientele of the regime. And so I am afraid that we will continue to see this escalation in repression and violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dalia. Thank you to all our speakers for these very rich presentations. I think we have a clear picture of a really alarming situation, and it will only escalate further if there's no clear intervention, including public intervention from the international community. In that regard, so I will only take a few questions because we only have 2 minutes left, but perhaps Mr. Voule, there's a question for you in the chat from an Algerian civil society organization asking, what can we do as an NGO working on Algeria, as an individual? What action can we take in order to change things, perhaps in terms of cooperation with special procedures and a UN mechanism? And what do you advise for the international community? What actions should the international community take, notably at the next Human Rights Council session?
Yes, thank you very much. Also, thank to the other panelists for your very insightful and informative presentation. And I think this also allows me also to understand better the holistic nature of the crisis currently in Algeria. In relation to the question about what civil society can do on the ground, I think you are already doing quite a lot in terms of monitoring the situation, providing us with information, continue to advocate for for authority to understand the need for Algerian people to move to the peaceful and democratic country. And after so many years of regime and repression that lead to this transition that we all expect to have a democratic and transparent transition, but unfortunately, but I think for me, I think the requests today from civil society in Algeria are legitimate, because one thing is to have a democracy, real democracy, to have a meaningful democracy, transparent, to ensure that the country, that everybody participates to the future of the country. And I think you are quite doing all. And I think from the civil society perspective, I think this is what you should be pushing, and you should continue to ensure also that authority hear your voice, but also that the international community are able also to be informed on what is going on. Algeria had obligation at the international level to fulfill his obligation and to protect these fundamental freedoms in the country. As to regard to the upcoming session, as I mentioned it, I think there is a need for states, and in particular those who are members of the Human Rights Council, to continue to pressure on the country to really reverse this tendency and of repression and of criminalization of peaceful protests, but also to facilitate the dialogue, a meaningful dialogue, because I think that this is the only way that the country can come back to the normal. The country can, that Algerian can sit down and talk about future of the country, what they want to see the country look like. And I think without the dialogue, it will be quite difficult to see the end of all of what is going on currently.
Thank you very much. That's very clear. I know we've already passed the time, so I'll perhaps ask one final question kind of to conclude to Mouloud. I know we haven't spoken a lot about the legislative elections that happened last weekend. Could you perhaps give us very briefly kind of your conclusions, your views on the conclusion of these elections, what they demonstrate, and if you think following these elections, it is still very relevant for the international community to speak out publicly about Algeria now?
Thank you, Nadesh, for the question. I think Dalia said it already. The military, the high, the high profile generals, they don't want to be in front of the people, in front of the society. And they need their civilian facade, which has been destroyed by in the few first weeks of the Hirak. So they are not rebuilding the institutions. They are not rebuilding the state institutions. They are only rebuilding a civilian facade to hide that that the reality of power, the sovereignty is in the hands of the military. So in the military leadership. So the problem is that first, people, they don't want to participate in elections which are not free, where they cannot express themselves. So it's not the problem, but it's the problem for the authorities. The second point is that the authorities themselves, Abdelmajid Tebboune said that he doesn't care about the level of participation in the elections, because the most important is that he has persons elected. So if they are elected by 2 or 3 voters, it's enough for him. So the lack of legitimacy is even not anymore a problem for the authorities, because they say we don't care about legitimacy. We are here because we are powerful and you are weak, so we will impose our rule. And this is the new language. They don't care about their legitimacy. What we can say from the Hirak point of view is that also there is at least the minimum is that there is a passive resistance from the high majority in the highest part of the society against this institutional game, which is a fake institutional life. So the people don't want to participate in a fake institutional life, and this is the main signal. And this fake institutional life, this civilian facade, which behind which the military rule is hiding, people, they don't want anymore to play this game and to give any credibility to this institutional facade.
Thank you very much, Mouloud. Thank you to all our speakers today. Unfortunately, we don't have much more time to take questions. I think this event was useful to raise alarm a little bit on the situation from the perspective of both international organizations, the UN Special Rapporteur and Algerian civil society, and of course, the research point of view on the situation in Algeria. We encourage all our viewers to also go view the joint letter that was issued yesterday and that we linked in the chat. Thank you again for everyone, and thank you to our interpreters for the help for their translation. Thank you, everyone.